A machine clicks in a basement office in Washington. Purple rotors spin. Japanese characters appear in English. Impossible. September 1940. A windowless room beneath the Navy Department. America is reading Japan's most secret messages in real time. This is the story of the intelligence breakthrough that should have prevented Pearl Harbor, but secrecy itself became the enemy. November 26, 1941, Navy Department Building, Washington, D.C. Lieutenant Commander Alwyn Kramer's hands trembled as he held the decrypt, not from cold. The radiators hissed with steam heat. Not from fatigue, though he'd been awake 18 hours. From the weight of what the words meant. Dongjing Fa, from Tokyo. The message had arrived that morning through channels only 14 men in America knew existed. 14 men who understood that the United States had accomplished what Japanese cryptographers believed impossible. They had broken purple. The cipher machine sat in the basement 3 floors below, a Frankenstein assembly of telephone stepping switches and rotors that had taken 18 months to reverse engineer without ever seeing the original. William Friedman, the Army cryptologist who'd led the project, had suffered a nervous breakdown from the strain, but it worked. God help them, it worked. Kramer read the decrypt again. Negotiations will be de facto ruptured. This time we mean it, that the deadline absolutely cannot be changed, after that things are automatically going to happen. Things are automatically going to happen. He looked at the timestamp. The message had been transmitted from Tokyo to Ambassador Nomura in Washington 36 hours ago. Nomura himself probably hadn't decoded it yet. His embassy's purple machine was slower, his clerks less efficient. America was reading Japan's mail faster than Japan's own diplomats. The irony tasted like metal. Kramer placed the decrypt in a locked pouch with 3 others from the past week. Each message had escalated. November 19th. The situation is nearing a crisis. November 22nd. Negotiations broken off. And yesterday, November 25th, the most explicit, relations are ruptured. He walked down the corridor where portraits of naval heroes watched with painted eyes. John Paul Jones, Dewey at Manila Bay. Men who'd fought enemies they could see. Kramer was fighting something harder, disbelief. Because that was the second secret about magic, the one nobody outside this building understood. Intelligence that couldn't be explained, couldn't be trusted. 2 years earlier, August 1939, a house on Nebraska Avenue. The breakthrough had begun with failure. Frank Rowlett stared at the wall of his apartment where he'd taped 60 sheets of graph paper. Each sheet represented 1 day's worth of intercepted Japanese diplomatic radio traffic. Columns of numbers marched across the pages, 20,000 5-digit groups that refused to make sense. Red, the first Japanese cipher system, had fallen in 1936. 4 years of American cryptologists reading Japan's diplomatic correspondence until Tokyo noticed security leaks and upgraded to something new. Something they called an Hao-ji Bishing, cipher machine type B. American naval intelligence called it purple. For 14 months, the system had been unbreakable, not difficult, unbreakable. The mathematics suggested it was a transposition cipher with at least 20,000 possible key combinations. Rowlett took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. His wife had stopped asking when he'd come to bed. William Friedman, his boss at the Army Signal Intelligence Service, had warned him, "This one might beat us, Frank." That morning, Friedman himself had been hospitalized. Overwork, the doctors said, nervous exhaustion, the polite term for a brilliant mind that had stared too long into encrypted darkness and cracked. But Friedman had left Rowlett a note. Watch the 6-consonant problem. Japanese writing used a limited set of consonant-vowel combinations. In any long message, certain patterns had to repeat. That was the theory. Rowlett had been testing it for 3 months. At 2:47 a.m. on August 28, 1939, he saw it. Groups 1847 and 3963 in a message from Tokyo to Berlin were identical, 64927. The same 5 digits, but they appeared in different positions, which meant his pencil moved faster. If Position 1 thought Heat 47 was the syllable A and the same five-digit group appeared 2,116 groups later, then the encipherment mechanism reset after he calculated 25 steps, 25 rotors or stepping switches cycling through. He grabbed another decrypt from the Berlin to Tokyo traffic. Different date, same pattern. Every 25th character the encryption sequence repeated. Not 20,000 combinations. 25. The machine was breakable. 6 months later, March 1940, Naval Research Laboratory. The replica sat on a workbench like an oracle built by madmen. 2 telephone stepping switches, the kind used in automatic phone systems, connected by an impossible tangle of wires. Leo Rosen, an SIS engineer who'd never taken a cryptography course, had assembled it based purely on mathematical deduction. They'd never captured a purple machine, never seen a photograph. This was architecture reverse engineered from shadows. "Power it up," Friedman said. He'd returned to work thinner, quieter, but present. Rosen flipped the switch. The stepping switches buzzed. He input a string of characters from that morning's intercepted Tokyo transmission. 72649-03847, 19283. The machine's output appeared on a teleprinter connected to the second switch. To all diplomatic posts, stop personnel change effective. English, clear text. Perfect. Friedman's face showed nothing. He'd learned not to celebrate. Run yesterday's traffic. They worked through the night. Every message they'd intercepted in the past 48 hours, 17 transmissions, decoded flawlessly. Tokyo to Washington, Tokyo to Berlin, Tokyo to its embassy in London, where Ambassador Shigemitsu was reporting British naval movements. At dawn, Friedman stood at the window watching the sun rise over the Potomac. "We're reading Japan's mind," he said quietly. "God help us use it right." But using it right required explaining where it came from, and that was impossible. The Problem with Magic, Spring, 1940. Admiral Richmond Turner spread the decrypt across his desk at the Office of Naval Intelligence and frowned. From Tokyo to Washington, it read, "Instruct Nomura to propose 3-month extension of negotiations. Emphasize peaceful intentions while operations proceed schedule." "Operations?" Turner said. "What operations?" Commander Kramer, standing at attention, said nothing. He'd delivered hundreds of magic decrypts to Turner over the past 6 months. The Admiral's question was always the same. Where did this come from? And Kramer's answer was always the same. "Classified source, sir." Turner slapped the paper. "Classified source. You bring me intelligence about Japanese military operations, and I can't tell my fleet commanders why they should believe it? Can't explain it to Admiral Kimmel in Hawaii? Can't brief the codebreakers at Station Hypo in Honolulu, who might actually contextualize this? Sir, the source is ultra-classified. By direct order of the Secretary of War, only 14 individuals. I know the list." Turner stood. "The President, the Secretaries of War and Navy, Army and Navy Chiefs of Staff, ONI and EMID directors, you couriers. That's it. And you expect me to send war warnings to the Pacific Fleet based on intelligence I can't source, can't verify with my own analysts, and can't allow anyone to question?" Kramer kept his face neutral. "Sir, if Japan learns we've broken purple, then they change their codes." "I understand ComSec." Turner walked to the window. "But if our own commanders don't believe the intelligence, what's the point of having it?" In the silence, Kramer heard the real question. "How do you act on a warning you can't explain?" That spring, Magic revealed Japanese diplomatic traffic discussing military coordination with Germany. Turner sent cautious alerts to Pacific commanders about possible hostile intentions based on sensitive intelligence sources. The replies came back skeptical. Admiral Husband Kimmel in Hawaii. Request clarification on threat assessment basis. Admiral Thomas Hart in Manila. Information appears speculative. Recommend concrete evidence before fleet repositioning. They didn't believe it because they didn't understand it. And they didn't understand it because understanding required knowing about purple. And knowing about purple was limited to 14 men who had to pretend their certainty came from conventional intelligence. The system ate itself. And if this intelligence paradox troubles you as much as it troubled those 14 men in 1941, hit that like button. Because what happened next proved that secrets kept from enemies can also be kept from friends, with fatal results. Now, October 1941, the Wind's message. The decrypt arrived at 3 a.m. on October 9th. Kramer read it in the Navy Department basement alone except for the night duty translator. The message was from Tokyo Foreign Ministry to all diplomatic posts. In case of emergency, danger of cutting off our diplomatic relations, and the cutting off of international communications, the following warning will be added in the middle of the daily Japanese language. Shortwave news. Broadcast. The message listed 3 code phrases. Higashi no kaze aim, east wind rain. Relations with America severed. Kita no kaze kumori, north wind cloudy. Relations with Russia severed. Nishi no kaze hair, west wind clear. Relations with Britain severed. Kramer stared at the paper. Japan had just told America, unknowingly, exactly how they would signal their diplomats that war was imminent. All Washington had to do was monitor Japanese radio broadcasts for these phrases. He hand-carried the decrypt to Admiral Stark's office at dawn. "This is it," Stark said, reading it twice. "A clear warning system. Once we hear east wind rain on their broadcasts, we'll know war is perhaps hours away." "Yes, sir." "I recommend we alert all Pacific listening posts to monitor—" "No." Stark set down the paper. "We can't explain how we know to listen for this specific phrase without revealing magic. If we tell Station Hypo in Hawaii to watch for east wind rain, their commander will ask why. And we can't tell him." Kramer felt the walls of the paradox closing in. "Sir, if we don't warn them, we'll warn them generically. Increase vigilance. War warning possible." "But we can't hand them the playbook." The generic warning went out November 27th. "This dispatch is to be considered a war warning. Negotiations with Japan have ceased." Admiral Kimmel in Pearl Harbor received it and asked for clarification. What negotiations? Ceased how? When should he expect attack? The reply was classified silence. He positioned his fleet for a submarine threat, the most logical danger, left his battleships at their moorings, kept his aircraft carriers at sea, but his patrol planes grounded for maintenance because war warnings had come before and nothing happened. On November 28th, a Japanese language broadcast included the phrase, "Higashi no kaze aim," east wind rain. The handful of cryptologists in Washington who understood heard it. Commander Kramer heard it. But Admiral Kimmel in Hawaii didn't because nobody could tell him what to listen for without explaining magic. The secret was kept perfectly from everyone. December 6th, 1941, the night before. Commander Kramer worked through the night as 13 parts of a long Japanese message came through in pieces. The decrypt was labeled Purple Decrypt 901913. Each part required manual processing through the replica machine. The full message wasn't complete until 8 a.m. December 7th. It read, "To Ambassador Nomura, the Japanese government regrets to inform you negotiations are terminated. You are instructed to deliver this message to the Secretary of State at 1 p.m. Washington time, December 7th. 1 p.m. Washington time." Kramer's mind calculated 7:30 a.m. in Hawaii. He grabbed the decrypt and ran, not walked, ran to Admiral Stark's office. The duty officer told him Stark was at church. Kramer called the president's naval aide who called the White House. At 10:30 a.m., President Roosevelt read the decrypt in his study. Harry Hopkins stood beside him. "This means war," Roosevelt said. "Yes, sir. The timing is precise. 1 p.m. here is dawn in the Pacific." Roosevelt picked up the phone to call Stark, get warnings to the Pacific Fleet immediately. But Stark was still unreachable. The Army's General Marshal was horseback riding at Fort Myer. At 11 a.m., Kramer managed to reach Admiral Kimmel's office in Hawaii by secure phone. But secure meant not mentioning magic. The warning came out garbled. Possible hostile action. Take defensive measures. Time uncertain. Kimmel, who'd received similar vague warnings 6 times in the past 4 months, acknowledged it and returned to his paperwork. At 11:25 a.m., Marshall finally returned and read the decrypt. He drafted a warning to all Pacific commanders. Japanese presenting ultimatum. 1 p.m. Eastern Time today. Stop just what significance hour is we do not know, but be on alert. The message went by commercial telegram because radio circuits were busy. It reached Hawaii at 7:33 a.m. local time. The attack had begun at 7:55. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Private Joseph Lockard saw them on radar at 7:02 a.m. The Opana Point mobile radar station at Kahuku Point picked up a massive blip 132 miles north. Dozens of aircraft, maybe more than 100, heading directly toward Oahu. He called the information center at Fort Shafter. The duty officer, a pilot in training, not an intelligence specialist, checked the morning log. We've got B-17s coming in from California around that time. Must be them. Sir, this is a lot of planes. Don't worry about it. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave struck. Torpedo bombers came in low over the water. Dive bombers screamed down on Battleship Row. Fighters strafed Hickam Field, Wheeler Field, Kaneohe Naval Air Station. The second wave hit at 8:54. 2,403 Americans dead. 1,178 wounded. 8 battleships damaged or destroyed. 188 aircraft destroyed on the ground. In Washington, the messages arrived in fragments. Broken radio transmissions, panicked phone calls. By noon Eastern Time, the scope was clear. The Pacific Fleet had been crippled. In the Navy Department basement, Commander Kramer sat at his desk surrounded by that morning's purple decrypts. Messages about the timing of the diplomatic note. Messages about Japanese fleet movements they'd intercepted, but couldn't fully decode because those were in JN-25, the naval code they hadn't completely broken. The intelligence had been there, in pieces, in implications, in diplomatic traffic that said negotiations were ending at a precisely calculated time. In the east wind rain signal they'd heard but couldn't share. They'd known. Sort of. In the way you know something terrible might happen, but can't prove it will. And they'd kept the secret so perfectly that the people who needed to act on it never believed it was real. The aftermath. Learning to use magic. The paradigm shifted overnight. December 8th, Roosevelt addressed Congress. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. What he didn't say: we were reading your messages for 18 months. Within a week, the magic distribution list expanded from 14 names to 47. Field commanders in the Pacific received special intelligence officers, SIOs, who were cleared to brief them on intercept-derived intelligence without revealing the technical sources. Admiral Chester Nimitz, appointed to command the Pacific Fleet, was one of the first briefed. He read a week's worth of decrypts and asked the question no one had answered for Kimmel. Why didn't someone tell him directly? The SIO's answer: security protocol, sir. We couldn't risk. Risk what? Losing the fleet? We lost it anyway. Nimitz threw the papers on his desk. From now on, if magic says something's happening, you tell me. I'll decide if it's actionable, and I'll trust my commanders with enough context to act. Understand? Yes, sir? The system began to work because secrecy became selective instead of absolute. May 1942, the Battle of Coral Sea. The decrypt came through on May 5, 1942. Operation Mo proceed as scheduled. Stop covering force. Depart Rabaul May 7. Stop Port Moresby invasion force. Station Hypo in Hawaii, now read into magic and working with purple decrypts plus partially broken JN-25 naval code, triangulated. Japan was sending carriers to the Coral Sea to support an invasion of Port Moresby, New Guinea. Admiral Nimitz called his SIO. How confident are you? Very, sir. Multiple intercepts confirm the operation name, route, and timing. Can you tell me how you know? We've broken their diplomatic code and partially broken their naval code, sir. We're reading their operational traffic. Nimitz nodded. This was the new paradigm, trust based on explanation. Get Fletcher his task force coordinates. Tell him why we know. Task Force 17, carriers Lexington and Yorktown, intercepted the Japanese fleet May 7th. The battle lasted 2 days. Lexington was sunk, Yorktown damaged, but the Japanese invasion force turned back. Port Moresby remained in Allied hands. First time in history a naval battle was fought without the fleet seeing each other directly. First time magic turned intelligence into action because the commander trusted it. Commander Joseph Rochefort, head of Station Hypo, was asked later how they'd pinpointed the Japanese fleet with such accuracy. "We read their mail," he said simply, "and this time we believed what it said." June 1942, Midway. The decrypt arrived May 10th, operation of scheduled early June, stop coordinate invasion force with carrier strike. Station Hypo identified AF as Japanese naval code for Midway Island. But Admiral King, Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, was skeptical. How do you know AF means Midway? Could be Hawaii, could be the Aleutians. Rochefort had learned from Pearl Harbor. Trust required proof, even when you knew you were right. He ordered Midway to send a fake message, unencrypted in the clear, reporting their water desalination plant had broken down. Within 48 hours, Japanese intelligence transmitted, "AF reports water shortage." Rochefort sent the intercept to King with a note, "AF Midway, confirmed." King authorized the deployment of all three available carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, to ambush the Japanese fleet, June 4, 1942. The Japanese carrier force approached Midway expecting surprise. Instead, American dive bombers were waiting at the exact coordinates predicted by magic intercepts. In 6 minutes of combat, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, were burning. Hiryu was sunk later that day. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 248 aircraft, and 3,000 men. Admiral Nimitz's after-action report credited superior intelligence, but didn't mention magic by name. The secret was still protected, but now it was used. And if you want to hear more stories of intelligence operations that changed history, stories that remained classified for decades, subscribe now. Because what magic revealed about the rest of the war makes Pearl Harbor look like prologue. But first, the top moment, April 1943, the price of success. The decrypt arrived April 13, 1943, Admiral Yamamoto inspection tour, Balal Airfield, April 18th stop departure, Rabaul 600, arrival Balal 800, complete itinerary, aircraft type, 2 Mitsubishi G4M bombers, fighter escort, 6 Zeros, flight path, timing. Commander Kramer stared at it. Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man whose tactical genius had nearly crippled the Pacific Fleet. His schedule delivered like a gift. This was what magic had become, not just reading the enemy's mail, but reading their calendar. The decrypt went to Admiral Nimitz with a question typed at the bottom. Recommend action? Nimitz called his intelligence staff and war planners. The debate lasted 2 days. If we shoot down Yamamoto's plane, one planner argued, Japan will know we have their codes. They'll change everything. We'll go blind. If we don't, another countered, we're letting the enemy's best naval strategists live when we have a clear shot. Nimitz made the decision April 17th. Do it, but make it look like a lucky encounter. April 18th, 1943. 18 P-38 Lightning fighters from Guadalcanal flew a circuitous 435-mile route over the ocean, timing their arrival for the exact moment Yamamoto's aircraft would cross the Bougainville coast. At 7:43 a.m., they spotted 2 bombers and 6 Zeros, exactly as the decrypt predicted. The P-38s attacked. Yamamoto's bomber crashed in the jungle. He was found in the wreckage, still gripping his katana, killed instantly by gunfire. Tokyo announced his death April 21st with a cover story, Heroic Combat Death During a Routine Inspection. American newspapers reported it as a remarkable stroke of luck. But in the Navy Department basement, Kramer and his team waited anxiously for 2 weeks. Would Japan suspect? Would purple go dark? May 1st came. The usual volume of Japanese diplomatic traffic continued, same encryption patterns. They didn't know. Friedman, in his small office in the Army Annex, allowed himself 1 moment of satisfaction before returning to work. They'd turned intelligence into action, kept the source secret, won. but his hands still shook sometimes when he held the decrypts, because each success raised the stakes. Each message they read meant the pressure to act without revealing how they knew. The paradox hadn't disappeared, they'd just learned to dance with it. August 1945, the final decrypt. The message came through August 10, 1945, from Tokyo to their ambassador in Moscow. Hirohito has decided to accept Potsdam terms. Stop advise Soviet Foreign Ministry. Japan surrenders. President Truman read it at 7 a.m., 12 hours before Japan's public announcement. The war was ending. Magic had been instrumental. Midway, dozens of smaller operations, strategic decisions based on intercepted diplomatic negotiations with neutral powers. But Truman also read the casualty reports from the previous 4 years: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Jima. 400,000 American casualties because the Pacific War had to be fought after Pearl Harbor happened instead of being prevented. He turned to Admiral Leahy. "We knew they were coming." "We suspected, sir. The intelligence was fragmentary." "We broke their codes in 1940. We read their messages for 18 months before Pearl Harbor." Truman's voice was quiet, controlled. "Why didn't we stop it?" The answer was complex. The secrecy, the skepticism, the incomplete picture. Purple only covered diplomatic traffic, not operational naval messages in JN 25. The human failure to imagine that the intelligence fragments meant what they meant. But Truman reduced it to a simpler truth. Intelligence that can't be shared can't be used. That became the founding principle for what emerged from Magic's legacy, the National Security Agency, the formalization of signals intelligence with protocols for dissemination, verification, and action. The understanding that secrets must be protected, but also weaponized through careful sharing with those who need to know. Epilogue: The Mathematics of Trust. William Friedman retired from the NSA in 1955. His legacy included Purple, of course, but also the institutional framework that made signals intelligence actionable. He gave one interview to a classified internal NSA journal in 1958. The interviewer asked, "What was the biggest challenge of breaking Purple?" Friedman's answer, "We broke Purple in 8 months. It took us 4 years to break the habit of secrecy." He explained, "The mathematics of cryptography are beautiful. Input, transformation, output, logical, predictable. The mathematics of human trust are impossible. How do you convince someone to act on information you can't explain? How do you share a secret without destroying its value?" Pearl Harbor happened because we solved the first problem but not the second. We broke their code, but we didn't break our own culture of compartmentalization. Every decrypt we produced was perfect intelligence and perfect secrecy, which meant it was also perfectly useless until someone believed it. The interviewer asked, "Do you think Magic ultimately succeeded?" Friedman paused. "We won the war, so yes. But we lost the peace before it began. 2,400 people died at Pearl Harbor because we kept the secret too well. That's the paradox of intelligence work. The better you protect the source, the harder it is to use it. And if you can't use it, why have it?" The legacy: what Magic taught. The Purple Machine, replica number 1, sits in the National Cryptologic Museum in Fort Meade, Maryland. 2 telephone stepping switches connected by wire. It doesn't look like the most sophisticated intelligence breakthrough of World War II. It looks like something assembled in a basement by obsessive engineers, which is exactly what it was. The museum plaque reads, "Operation Magic, 1940-1945, broke Japanese diplomatic code, provided strategic intelligence throughout Pacific War." What it doesn't say, Magic worked perfectly and failed catastrophically, both at the same time. The decrypt accuracy was 100%, every message decoded correctly, every word readable. But the human system around it, the protocols for dissemination, the culture of trust, the ability to transform intelligence into action, was broken at Pearl Harbor and had to be rebuilt from wreckage. Admiral Kimmel spent the rest of his life arguing he'd been denied the intelligence that could have saved his fleet. He was right and wrong. The intelligence existed, but in a form he couldn't access, couldn't verify, and therefore couldn't act on. Commander Kramer, who'd hand-carried dozens of warnings in the months before Pearl Harbor, testified at the Roberts Commission investigation in 1942. Asked why he hadn't been more explicit with Pacific commanders, he answered, "I told them everything I was allowed to tell them," which was apparently nothing that mattered. The tension in that sentence, everything and nothing, defined Magic's early failure. By 1945, the system had evolved. Special intelligence officers embedded with field commanders, careful cover stories to protect sources while sharing conclusions. Admiral Nimitz's rule, "Tell me what you know and why you trust it. I'll decide what to do." Trust through transparency, even when transparency had to be carefully controlled. November 2024, the lessons unlearned. Every intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor echoes Magic's paradox. September 11, 2001, CIA and FBI had fragments of intelligence about al-Qaeda members in flight schools, but interagency secrecy and compartmentalization prevented the fragments from being assembled into a coherent picture. Information existed but couldn't be shared effectively. Iraq WMDs, 2003. Intelligence assessments were distributed widely, but the sources and confidence levels were obscured. Policymakers acted on intelligence they didn't fully understand because the technical details were classified. The pattern repeats. Intelligence can be too secret to be useful, or it can be shared so widely it loses credibility. Finding the balance remains the unsolved problem. In 2011, the NSA declassified 2,400 Magic decrypts from 1940-1941. Historians can now read exactly what Washington knew before Pearl Harbor. The messages are stark. November 5th, relations are extremely critical. November 22nd, deadline approaching. November 26th, this means war, all decoded in real time, all distributed to the 14 people who could read them, all insufficiently actionable because they couldn't be explained, verified, or trusted by the commanders who needed them. The tragedy wasn't that America didn't know war was coming. The tragedy was that knowing wasn't enough. The human element. Frank Rowlett, who'd seen the first purple patterns at 2:47 a.m. in 1939, retired from NSA in 1965. He gave a talk to new cryptologists that year. His final point, "You'll break codes, you'll intercept messages, you'll produce intelligence that could change history, and then you'll watch people ignore it because they don't understand where it came from. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's a failure of translation. Your job isn't just to break the code. It's to break through the disbelief. Remember Pearl Harbor not as a cryptographic failure. We broke the code perfectly, but as a human systems failure. We couldn't bridge the gap between knowing and believing." One of the students asked, "How do you bridge that gap?" Rowlett smiled. "We're still figuring that out." The final count. Magic produced approximately 1,000 decrypted messages between 1940 and 1945. Most were routine diplomatic traffic, trade negotiations, personnel changes, mundane communications between embassies. But embedded in that million messages were 14 intercepts in November 1941 explicitly warning of imminent war, 37 messages revealing Japan's Midway operation plan, 127 decrypts tracking Japanese naval movements in the Coral Sea, one message giving Admiral Yamamoto's complete flight itinerary, 3,147 messages revealing Japanese diplomatic strategy, military coordination with Germany, intelligence assessments of Allied strength. Every single message was decoded accurately. The mathematics never failed. The humans did. At first, then learned, then won. That's the story of Magic. Perfect intelligence, imperfect trust, and the painful, bloody education in between. The Watchers. In the basement of the Navy Department on December 8, 1941, Commander Kramer returned to his desk after 36 hours without sleep. The radio was broadcasting Roosevelt's Day of Infamy speech to a joint session of Congress. He pulled out the November 26 decrypt, "Things are automatically going to happen," and pinned it to his wall. Beneath it, he wrote a note on a typewriter. "We knew, we didn't believe. never again. That note stayed on his wall until the war ended, a reminder that intelligence is only intelligence if it changes decisions. Otherwise, it's just information that arrives before the catastrophe it predicts. Magic taught the United States how to read minds. It took Pearl Harbor to teach them how to trust what they read. The code was the easy part. Believing it was the war they fought before they could fight Japan, and that paradox that the secret too well kept becomes the secret that fails, remains Magic's darkest legacy and most urgent lesson.